So next lesson now is all about creating features, creating data in a map, and actually starting to draw. So if we go back to our QGIS project, I've got a new layer here lined up, which is basically the outline of some shapes that we're basically going to draw around. It's an image file, so if I drag and drop this over here, hopefully you would know what to expect doing that. It's not georeferenced, so first of all it's going to ask me what coordinate reference system that I want. We'll put it as British National Grid because that's the system we're using for all of this mapping. But then it's going to locate it down the bottom corner of the British National Grid system because it has no georeference data attached to it. So it won't appear on our map here. It's not kind of like drag and drop to this location. If we zoom to the layer, then it'll take us to it. So let's talk a little bit about navigation of a layer first, because I've not really covered this yet. So if we use the map navigation toolbar, if we grab the hand, you can basically hold down the left button and you can basically pan up and down, left and right, diagonally, whatever you want. Another way to achieve that is to hold the spacebar button down, and you can see that hand now changes to a grab icon, and that does exactly the same thing. Third way of doing that, if you've got a mouse with a wheel on it, if you hold down the wheel mouse button, again, does exactly the same thing, allows you to pan on the map. Again, with using your wheel mouse, if you can zoom in and out on a map, using the tools up here, the zoom in, you can zoom into an area or zoom into a more specific area. If you use the zoom out button, you're basically saying I want to zoom out but keep that central to the map. So it won't center, it won't kind of zoom to the level of the box, it'll zoom out based on where you've selected as your center point. So let's get drawing. The first thing we need to do is to create a new shapefile layer. So what we do, actually the first thing I'm going to do is tidy this up a little bit. So one thing you can do is group layers together. You're not grouping the data in the files, you're literally just grouping all of this together, and the benefit of that is then you can turn all of that data on and off again in one kind of one go, rather than individually selecting all these in all of these layers. You might want to combine all of the raster data and the vector data in different ones. It's completely flexible on how you work. You may not know how you work yet if GIS is new to you, but it's just an option you can. If you're going to undo that, you don't click on remove group. Remove group will remove all of this data from the project. It won't delete this data from the files it's contained in, but it will remove all that data from the project, which is a bit of a pain in the ass. So to remove it from a group, you select what you want to remove from that group and then just drag it out, and now that no longer appears within that group. And again, to include it in the group, you just drag and drop it back into that group. As we're working on this separately, I'm going to take that out of the group, turn all that off, and minimize it. So there we go. That's what we're working on at the moment. So, new layer. Layer, create layer, not add layer. It's create layer and shapefile layer. GeoPackage is something that is kind of default within QGIS, but shapefiles are compatible across a number of different GIS packages. In a way, geo packages are as well, but shapefile it's created by Esri, the people that create ArcGIS, and it's a kind of standard format across a lot of different packages, including CAD. So I use shapefile to kind of maintain compatibility with a lot of other mapping software. Anyway, moving on from that, you need to give it a name. If you just give it a name here, it won't save it to a location. You need to open this, find where you're working in. So this is GIS training project. We'll create a new folder called shapefiles, because these are kind of user created shapefiles as opposed to base maps. And then we're going to call this shapes and save. You've got a choice of which type of file you're going to create: point, line and polygon. Ignore multi-point for now. We're going to be drawing shapes, so this is going to be a polygon layer. You then have the option of creating attributes for this layer. So for every shape that you draw within this layer, you can then assign a number of different attributes to it. So for example, you might want to say color, so you've then got the option of numbers and text. Text is obviously if it's either purely text or a combination of numbers and letters. Whole number, if it's a whole number, there's not going to be any decimal data in there. And then obviously decimal number for anything that's going to have decimals in, and then a date as well, but I've never used date, to be perfectly honest. It could be useful in stuff like biological recording. So we're going to have color as text, and then you can, so say this basically gives you a number of characters that you can use in this field. So most colors aren't going to be more than 10 letters long. So then if you click add to field, we can see now that we've got that down here in the fields list. We could then do something like shape. There is a limited number of characters you can add here. So you've got, 10 characters that you can give to each field. So sometimes you might be a little bit creative to what you call them. So let's call this shape number, and that's going to be a whole number, and we're not going to go over 99 different shapes. So let's add that to the list. And what else? What else might we want to use? Something like shape area. And area generally isn't whole numbers, so we'll create that as a decimal. And we'll add that to the list there. So now every shape that we create, we can add these 4 different attributes to it. ID is always present. It's an automatically generated one. It doesn't automatically generate the ID, but it gives you a field that you can actually put the ID in. To be perfectly honest, shape number, I could have used the ID field. It's exactly the same of what we're using there. So let's click OK on Polygon. Yep. The Z and M values are for height, elevation, and then height of object. So if we're using, if this is more of a 3D map, then we may want to add elevation data. And if we're using a 3D map that also has 3D objects within it, you might want the elevation plus the height of that object, such as a building or a wind turbine mast or anything really. So let's click OK. And then that's created our shapefile. If we look in our shapefile folder, we can then see all of the files associated with that shapefile. Again, the data for these shapefile are stored here. When we start drawing, it'll be saved here. It won't be saved within the project file. I can delete this project file and still have this data safe. I'm just trying to drill that into everyone's head to understand the difference between a project and the actual files that you include within a project. It just helps a lot trying to get your head around where everything's saved. What the project file does save though, so at the moment we have this shape. If we look at the properties here, if we draw a shape, it'll be drawn in this purple color. Well, purple, red, kind of, let's make it simple anyway. We'll just put green. So any shape we draw from now on will appear as green, and that is saved within the project file rather than the shapefile file. So if we were to bring the shapefile for shapes into a new project, it would then use the default coloring for that project, or if we set a new color for that in a new project, it won't affect the color in the other projects. So anyway, let's start drawing. So, oh, whoops, accidentally zoomed in. So the first thing we want to do is we need to select the layer that we're going to draw in. So that's going to be shapes. We need to toggle editing on. So this here is the Digitizing toolbar. Remember, if you haven't got that up already, you can right click and then find it, where is it, Digitizing toolbar, and turn it on. So we'll start editing. We then get this box here which is add polygon. You can see when I hover over that, it also gives you the shortcut of Control plus point. So if you like to use your shortcuts, should also say actually that you can customize your shortcuts to anything you want. So there's the add polygon feature, Control plus point. You can customize that if you want. So if we click on here, that then changes into this kind of stylus icon. Basic drawing is left click to place your first point. You then get this line to show you that you are drawing. Left click again at every subsequent point. As you're starting to draw the shape, it will then start showing you what that shape is going to look like. So we've got this nice pink square. We don't want to add any more points to this. This is showing that this is the last point that we drew in the first point. And if we left clicked again, that would add this triangle part to the side. But what we do to finish drawing the shape is to right click. So if we right click now, that'll then bring you up this attribute list. When I talked earlier about, I think, let's just cancel this at the moment. I think it was in here, digitizing, suppress attribute from pop-up after feature creation. If you select that, basically when you draw the shape, let's just quickly draw it again, 1, 2, 3, 4, and right click, it'll suppress this pop-up. It all depends on how you're working. People work in different ways. Sometimes you may want to add these attributes as you're adding the shape. Sometimes you want to do it at a later date, and there is a feature that allows you to select multiple shapes and add these kind of in bulk, so you don't have to type it out each individual time. It varies from what you're doing to how you want to do it, basically. So it's just all about figuring out how you like to work or how you need to work on a particular map. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm going to ignore this from now and click OK. So that's our first shape drawn. If we want to select that, we can use the attributes toolbar and we can select it here. There's a whole load of different ways of selecting. The select feature one's the basic. You just basically draw a box. Anything within that box will be selected, and then it churns a different color once it is selected. again, settings, options, somewhere in here. I can't remember where it is. General. Yes, selection color. So if I change that, when you select it, it'll basically appear in a different color. So let's get rid of that and deselect. You can either select somewhere that doesn't have anything, or you can just press the button here that deselects the feature. So that's a basic shape. If that's your whole map, then great, but that's never usually the case. So we usually have a number of shapes that are joined together. So if we do the same function for this, so click, 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 right click to finish, and then, oh, sorry, I'm starting to draw another shape there. If we do the same thing here, then that looks all good and fine, but if we zoom in, we can see we've got a sliver here, and there may even be some overlap down on the bottom here, where we've went over the top of the shape into the next one. And that's not what we want to be doing. We want to be drawing polygons that are polygons all nicely matched up together. So I'll show you the first technique to allow that to happen. One of the other options as well, that was about highlighting vertexes. So a vertex is wherever you've dropped a point. So you can see at every corner here we have a little red cross, and that was one of the settings that I've turned on. I like to be able to see where I've actually dropped these points, and you'll see again later why that is the case. But yeah, we don't want slivers and overlaps. That is very sloppy and bad practice and is unnecessary. So I'm selecting these shapes. I can either there's a delete button somewhere up here, isn't it? Delete shapes, delete selected. I can either click that or I can just press delete on the keyboard. If that was an accidental deletion, I've got undo, or again, like with most programs, the shortcut for undo is Control Z, and the shortcut for redo, if I did, oh, actually that's different, Control Shift and Z. I don't usually use the redo, but yeah, if we redo that, then that's deleted. So how you can get shapes matching with no overlaps and slithers. So we start drawing our first shape. So 1, 2. I always find it really useful to use the space bar to scroll, so then you don't have to move your finger off your left button mouse, left mouse button. So if we right click there, okay. So now what we want to do is use this toolbar here, which is called the snapping toolbar. To turn on snapping, we can either press S or press this button. It's quite useful to have just the S to turn it on and off. So let's look at the options. So which layers do you want to snap onto? At the moment, we've only got one active layer, which is the shapes layer. So I could either click all layers or active layer. It all depends how complex your map is and what you're trying to snap to. For this, I'm just going to choose active layer. Next option is vertex segment, or segment only. So vertex is where we've dropped a point. You can see that by these red crosses. Segment is the line that is drawn between the vertices. So all of these are segments, all of these points are vertices. Because we're going to want to have this meeting up to this point here, which is a segment, we could just press on segment, but generally the way I work, I'll have it set up as vertex and segment. This next part is also just what distance you would like snapping to happen at. There's various options, whether you want it meters, like meters at scale of the map or pixels on the map. Um, so if we, and the number is basically the actual distance. So if we put a small number like 1, we literally have to be on top of the point for it to snap. And you can see that's, oh, sorry, you can see you've got this little purple square appears when we're over the top of that segment there. If we up this to further away, so 50 pixels, as we come in close to this, see there it snaps. Obviously, if we're wanting to be drawing along this line, and we've got both vertex and segment selected, it's snapping onto that point there. So we want to reduce that down to something like 5. One thing you should do as well is save edits to any layer frequently. If you press Ctrl and S, it'll save the project and not the layer. You have to press this button up here to save edits to the layer. And as I said before, the project does not contain the data for each of these layers. It only contains the location and the formatting of these layers. So if you draw a shape and you close this without saving, you lose that shape. If you press Ctrl and S before closing, again, you lose that shape. You have to save up there. Sometimes you get issues that if you haven't saved, it doesn't kind of recognize the shape exists yet. So certain functions and features don't work quite right until you've actually saved. If you didn't want to make any more edits to this, you can also lock the layer then. So then I don't have access to any of these anymore, and I can't draw anymore on this layer. If you're on the wrong layer as well, you're going to have difficulties if you've got 2 shapefile layers and you're trying to draw on the wrong one, and you'll add it to the one that's selected when you start the edit window. So anyway, let's add the polygon feature. So now we've got snapping turned on. As we approach the segment, oh sorry, I've left clicked there. If you accidentally left click and start drawing, you can press escape, or even right click. If you've got multiple and it's accidental, cancel. If you've just got one, escape. But yeah, so you can see there it's snapping onto that segment. So left click, left click, left click. I'm holding space down to scroll, and then we're going to snap onto this segment here. Left click, and then right click to finish that shape. And that is now, let's change the formatting on this because it's hard to see where one shape starts and one shape ends. Also going to save it. So if we go into properties here and we look at symbology, if we select this up here, we get a choice here of the fill color and the stroke color. The stroke color is the outline, and the fill color is, well, it's the fill color. So let's change that to something that's going to stand out on a dark green. Let's go for a turquoisey blue color. Apply, and OK. So now we can see where one shape ends and the other starts. If we keep zooming on this as far as we want, both of those lines are perfectly matched up together. There are no overlaps. There are no slithers. It's all good. So next we have adjacent shapes with complex boundaries. So we could draw this in the same way. We draw off, well, will draw it just to demonstrate. We could click, click, click. I'm just going to do this very roughly. Draw that, right click to finish, and then we could come in with the snap tool and click, click, click. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and and then right click. Okay. So we've had to click on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points twice. And if this is a curved edge, you've almost got an infinite number of points that you'd have to click and re-click on. And that's obviously a bit of a waste of time. So we do have a tool that allows you to avoid having to do that. So let's start the first shape again. So again, I'm going to use the space bar to scroll in between points. Because again, that just saves having to move your fingers and is a good idea for RSI reasons. So if we right click here, that's creating our first shape. Now we're going to use in the snapping toolbar this over here, which is called tracing. I've started drawing again. I'm using a new mouse, so I keep accidentally clicking on it. It's a vertical mouse because I'm having some wrist issues at the moment. So we've got snapping set up. We can start using tracing. Again, you can either use T to start tracing or actually select up here. We've then got a drop down that allows you to draw an offset. You don't want to be doing that if you want your shapes to be perfectly matched up. If you want them offset, you can offset it. And I believe it works by whatever measurement you put up here. So if you want an offset by 5 pixels, then, well, you'd put in a 5 here and then want to offset it. But we're not wanting to use an offset because we want these matched up perfectly. So what we do, we start on a shared snapping point. Finish drawing the parts of the shape that aren't common. So that's all of the, well, we've got 2 common points and, sorry, 2 non-common points, 2 common points. Then if we select another common point, say here, you can see it automatically fills in all of this part. If we select it here, it fills in all of these for you. And if you select this one, which is the one before your first one, it should snap to every vertex before that point and save you a lot of time snapping onto those points. Again, right click to finish the shape, and that's it done. Again, this will be perfectly lined up. Sometimes if you have got very complex shapes, occasionally the oh, actually it's happened there because I've got, it's a good example actually of when it goes wrong. Because I am snapping to both vertex and segment, it's snapped onto the segment here rather than the vertex. So that's created this sliver here. And this is actually this is not a deliberate opportunity. I did genuinely mess that up there. But this is an opportunity to show you the vertex editor tool. And what that does is allows you to edit a shape. Select on that, click on the shape, hover over the shape, and it'll show you where you've dropped your points. If you right click on the shape, then it'll kind of fixate onto that particular shape and show you all the vertexes that you've actually drawn for that. You can then left click on one of those vertices and then you can bring it over here just to make sure I don't mess this up twice. I'm going to go to vertex only, and then that snaps onto that point there, and now we have a perfectly lined up shape. You don't have to right click to finish, you can just come away from the tool and then that'll just fix it in place, and then we're saving to save our edits there. There are other things you can do with this vertex tool as well. So say you can just delete a point by selecting it and pressing delete. You can you can add a new point onto it. So if you click this plus button here, or double click anywhere on the line, that will then allow you to place a new point. So there we go. That's that shape all kind of as it should be now. So our next way. So this is exactly the same shape, but this is a different method of achieving exactly the same thing. So first off, we draw the whole boundary of the shape. So add polygons, go for the whole shape, and there's the whole boundary of the shape done. Unfortunately, I chose a solid green colour before, so I'm going to change that because we can't see the line underneath it now that we want to edit. So I'm going to drop down the opacity. That should do it, around 25%. Okay, so we can see this green shape now, and we've got this line in the middle. We're now going to use a new toolbar, and this is the Advanced Digitizing. No, what's it called? Yeah, Advanced Digitizing toolbar. I was right. And we've got these scissors over here. There's two of them. Be careful to get the right one. Split features will split one shape into two new features. Split parts is different. It doesn't do the same thing. I'm not going to go into that today. It's split features that you want to use. So we select that. We get our little digitizing stylus thing there. So what it does is basically, I'll show you the basic function before I actually do this as it is. If you've got any shape, you start outside that shape, left click, draw through that shape, left click, then right click to finish, and it'll basically cut that shape in half. Control Z to undo. So because we've got a slightly more complex line, it's not just a straight cut. What I usually do, you need to start outside of the shape, and that is key to this tool. You need to start outside of the shape, and the cut has to be something that goes through the whole shape. You cannot cut a hole out. That's a different tool which we'll come on to in a second. So start outside of the shape. We're going to snap to the segment just to get an accurate location there. We then left click, left click, left click, left click, left click. Again, snap to the segment here, and then draw one last point outside of the shape. We right click, and now that shape is divided. I'm going to change the formatting on this a little bit because it's not easy to see. Let's put something a little bit more. If I go white for the outline color, that should show it up a bit better. Actually, we need a bigger one. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, it's showing up as not quite white because it's a transparent white. So anyway, you can see the boundary there of that shape where it's been cut. You can use that on more complex shapes, which is getting more like an actual site. So again, starting with the add feature, we draw the whole site boundary. Right click to finish the shape. Select the correct tool, not that one. If I could remove it, I would from this toolbar. There might be an option to customize your toolbars, don't know. So we're splitting the feature here. We're going to take out this triangular part in the corner here first. So we're going to, so we are going to be snapping to the vertexes, whatever. I'm correcting myself there. It's a bad sign. So we are going to snap onto the vertex at each corner rather than a segment. So I'm going to be careful this time, and to avoid any kind of slivers, I'm going to remove the option to snap onto a vertex. Oh, sorry, snap onto a segment. So left click outside the shape, left click onto the bit we're snapping onto, another point, snap outside, right click. That's carved now a corner of that. If we select the shape, we can see the two different parts it's carved into. Could have used that example for this as well. Again, you can see where it's carved it up. So we've got one last cut to do. You'll start with, this is your shape here. This is your shape. You start outside the yellow area, you finish outside the yellow area. If you start within another feature, but not going through it entirely, it won't cut it. If I started over here, actually, let's just demonstrate. If let's turn the selection off. If I start here, snap there, go there, 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 there. I want to snap onto the segment this time. I want that segment. Finish here, right click. We actually have cut through this feature as well. If we start inside and don't go fully through it, we won't cut it. So click. I've turned that off. We want both. We want both this time. But I'm going to zoom in to make sure I am there. You do actually get different symbols. It might be hard to see here, but you get a square symbol. Actually, hold on. Let's up this so we're not actually on top of it. No, that's not enough. 20. Yeah, you get a square symbol when snapping to a vertex, but you get a cross. It's more like an hourglass kind of shape when you're snapping onto a segment. So there is that quick check to see exactly what you're actually snapping onto. So yeah, we can see that's a square. We know it's snapping onto a vertex. There. And we know we're snapping onto a segment here. It's the hourglass shape. And then one click outside, right click, and we can see now that's cut these into 3 shapes and not the 4 if we started outside of that. So again, using that exact same process, but for more cuts, hopefully this will demonstrate how quickly you can actually carve up a kind of more complicated site with the minimum number. Oh, whoops! What did I do there? It's because I've got a shape selected. There's a special function of this tool when you've got a shape selected, and I'll get onto that in a bit. So if you've got a shape selected and you're trying to cut a different area of your a different polygon, it will give you an error. I'm kind of glad that showed up actually. Wasn't deliberate again. Also shows that no one's perfect. So click, 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 right click. That hasn't worked. Oh dear. Well, let's save. Let's try again. What's going wrong here? This is a real shame. I've got to this point in the video and it's gone wrong now. Let's do a quick test shape. See if it's something specific with that shape that I've messed up. Okay. I think because I faffed with this a little bit, it's messed it up. So let's redraw that and start again. new shape. Now let's snip. Wrong one. Let's go for the right one. I'm not even going to snap to any of these sections because they're just straight lines. But if you wanted to be accurate, it's best to. You may genuinely have a site that looks like this if it's a farmland site. But anyway, that's just to demonstrate how quickly you can get through a site just by carving those parts up, as opposed to doing a different way. So, for example, where's my select tool? If we delete that, what we could do on this instead is using snapping and tracing. Well, actually, you'd probably only need to use snapping. So we draw one shape here. Snap to the corner there. Snap to the vertex there. But again, I'm still having to. I guess we could start using the. Oh, I'm still having to use the same number of points anyway, so even the tracing tool isn't providing any real benefits. Oh, no, I don't want to draw that full shape. Maybe if I start... No, not really getting any benefits from using the snap and trace approach when it's like this, when it's such simple shapes. If it were more complex shapes, then it would make a difference. But this is a different approach that you may use. Similar kind of... looks exactly the same, but a different methodology for actually going through it. Sometimes when it is a very complex site, and you can't get your head around how you need to carve the shapes up, you just can't see it. Some sites can turn into kind of little logic puzzles. Sometimes that's genuinely the best way to proceed, by just drawing polygon by polygon until you hit a point where something is contained completely within something else, which is what we're now going to get onto. So yeah, we've got a different tool for you now. Same starting point though. We're going to draw around, just assume this was the site boundary. Say this is a site boundary, and within this site you have a garden. Within that garden you have some hard standing, and within that hard standing you have a building. So actually we'll do this with the actual attributes as well. So let's delete this again. So drawing our first shape. Doesn't matter if you go clockwise or anti-clockwise. So let's call that shape. We haven't really got a habitat, so let's use it in the colour. We'll call this grassland. Not a very accurate Phase 1 habitat description, but we're not here to learn about Phase 1 habitats, we're here to learn about mapping. So our tool is fill ring. It's just the same as digitizing a normal shape, but what you're needing to do is, it's a shape completely contained within another shape. So left click, left click, left click and left click, right click to finish it off. I do like to kind of bring your digitizing stylus away from the shape when you think you've finished, just because then it shows your starting point and where your last point drawn is. Because if you put another point here on top of your first point, that will actually cause you problems. So avoid doing that. And this is a good way to actually make sure you are avoiding doing that, by just bringing it off to the side and going, yeah, that's the shape that I want. Right click to finish. And we'll call this, because I can't even call it hard standing because I've not HS. Because we're cutting out of an original shape. That's why it had grassland already entered in there. If this was a new shape, it would actually just give you the, it would be blank. It would have the default value. So then let's call that hard standing. And then we want to cut out one more shape in here. And right click to finish. We'll call that building. And then we have 3 different shapes, and each one of those shapes has kind of, they aren't just drawn on top of each other. They're not overlaps. They are contained within the previous shape. Let's just look at my notes of what I was saying. Yeah, it is the fill ring tool. So this is a different story here. So say we wanted to draw this using kind of similar methods to what we've just done. If you draw the boundary, that's okay. We can then do the fill ring, because that's a shape contained completely within another shape. There we go. And then we do the split features, and we draw across, and then we go, no, I don't want to actually be snipping this bit in the middle. If I right click now, we'll get, this will also be clipped. Be split, and that's not what we wanted. That's not what we wanted to do. So there's 2 ways. One way to avoid it and one way to fix it. If we wanted to fix this, we can select the 2 parts we've just cut in half, and then use the merge selected features tool. It shows you the attributes for both of those features, and then you can choose the final attribute for the merged, because you may have different attributes for these, and you obviously want to create, you want to make sure they're the same for the merged one. So if we click OK, and then that's now created these 3 separate shapes. Another way of approaching that would be, let's just delete all of these to start with now. And then we shall draw that. Right click, OK. Again, do the split ring. Draw this shape inside of that shape. Right click, OK. Now, if we select the shape we want to split, this one on the outside, not this one on the inside, and now do the split features tool. So click here, click there, and there. Although we are drawing through the middle of this here, you can see, oh sorry, that's, I think that's snapped around the edges. Let's stop that. It's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, sometimes the trace tool can go a bit rogue. So what actually happened there is that automatically diverted it around the edges, which is not what I wanted, because then it's not traveling through the shape that we want to split. And then right click, and then it split these 3 into the shapes that we actually wanted, and we don't then have to use the fill, the stitch, what's it called? merge selected features tool to repair that. Hopefully that's how I originally planned to do it, and that's how we have done it. So for all maps, you should be able to just use the standard tools, which are just standard drawing, snapping, going to draw a bit more of a complicated one here, just for the tracing to work. So tracing, splitting, and filtering.